The Washington Commanders finished the 2023 season with a 4-13 record and missed the playoffs for the 7th time in 8 years. It was a very long season for the Commanders as they finished dead last in points allowed per game and dead last in yards allowed too. They allowed 30 or more points in 10 of the 17 games they played and had 7 double-digit losses in the process. This was after they started the year 3-3, and things weren't looking good per se, but things weren't looking as bad as they were just a few months later. The franchise opted to trade not just one, but two former first-round pass rushers in Chase Young and Montez Sweat before the trade deadline, and their season did not go well after. And to be clear, they weren't going to go 12-5 and make a postseason run had they kept Young and Sweat, but that certainly didn't help with their 2023 season. Ron Rivera was as fired as a coach as I've ever seen, and there were times where they panned to him on the sideline down the stretch of the 2023 season where everyone knew that Ron was gone at season's end. And the good news for the Commanders and their fan base is the worst days are behind them. They endured a lot throughout the 2023 season, and really for the past 20 years for that matter too, but for the first time in several years, their future does not look dim. And now with Jaden Daniels as their franchise quarterback, along with the other improvements they made this offseason, the worst days are behind them. They're not going to get beat 65-20 in the final 2 games of the 2024 season like they did in the final 2 games of the 2023 season. And now the question is, how many games can they actually win this year? Well, we're going to break everything down in today's video. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing who the Commanders brought in free agency and who they lost in free agency prior to the NFL draft. Obviously, when you trade away 2 edge rushers like Washington did in the middle of a season, you are going to have to replace them the following offseason, which is exactly what Washington did. Dan Quinn brought edge Dorrance Armstrong with him to the nation's capital, and technically Tyler Biadasz too, and we'll get to him in a minute. But in 2023, Dorrance had over 30 pressures, had 7.5 sacks, and was a really good second pass rusher behind Micah Parsons. And over the last 2 years, Dorrance quietly has 16 total sacks, which again is really solid production. Not great, of course, but solid. And the one big thing we are going to emphasize with the Commanders in today's video is this offseason was about raising the floor from where they were at the end of the 2023 season. Because this team at the end of 2023 was down and out, and they played like it. And I know the Commanders brought in a lot of free agents this offseason, and there were a lot of jokes about bringing in Austin Eckler and Bobby Wagner specifically, saying how good this team would have been back in 2019 and inferring these guys are over the hill. And we'll get to those guys, but the point is, General Manager Adam Peters knew this was not going to be an overnight fix, and so did Dan Quinn. Neither took the job thinking they were going to go from 4-13 to a 15-2 team that runs the table with a rookie quarterback in the first year of those two as a GM and a head coach duo. And the point of all of those free agent signings was to raise the floor from what this team was last year and to be able to buy time with the rebuild. Because what also has to be remembered is this was not a great team that was a quarterback away. This team had a lot of holes and everyone knew it. Now, I do have a slight concern with the Dorrance Armstrong signing, and it's that Dorrance is a good Robin pass rusher, but not a Batman true alpha 70 pressure 12 sack pass rusher. And that's fine, because the second tier pass rushers have a clear role, and teams need them. I promise, no team is going to deny 21 sacks over the last 2 years from their second pass rusher and say they're good without that production. But my concern with Armstrong is the demand of going from being the second best edge rusher to the primary edge rusher and everything that entails. I'm sure Washington fans can't stand Micah Parsons given that he is a division rival and how elite of a player he is, but not every player is Micah and he makes his job look easy. And simply put, I don't expect Dorrance to be anywhere close to that type of player, meaning the true alpha edge pass rusher. He also wasn't paid to be that type of guy, but what I will say for both Dorrance and Cleveland Farrell, who Washington's other edge rusher is, having Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen on the interior is going to be extremely beneficial for them. And I do think in the sense of Washington prioritizing the interior defensive line, that they are taking steps in the right direction due in large part to this. and I absolutely commend them for taking Johnny Newton in the second round when he fell in their laps to only beef up the defensive line more. Johnny is a lighter defensive tackle, whereas Daron Payne is obviously a big boy along the interior, and I wouldn't doubt that Johnny takes snaps at 5 tech in obvious passing situations this year because of the value he brings as a rusher. Clelin Ferrell was signed to a 1-year deal worth a little under $4 million, and he is an obvious example of just raising the floor until they can really attack the position they want to moving forward. And Clelin has just 13.5 sacks in 5 years after being drafted number 4 overall back in 2019, and if for some miraculous reason he has a career year this year and has 45 pressures and has a 6 or 7 sack season, then Washington can effectively sign him to a 2-year deal next offseason and only guarantee 1 year of pay. That way they would be protected as a franchise. Ferrell is pretty much the definition of a guy that could be a bargain, and if he does not work out, no harm, no foul. I also think the same applies to Jeremy Chinn, a player who had a really good first few years of his career, then would go on to play just 23 games over the next 2 seasons and not look close to the same player he was back in 20 and 21. I obviously wish the best for Jeremy Chinn, but I also think it's important to be realistic when thinking about his impact with the 2024 Commanders. It's very much a case of expect the worst and hope for the best. And I don't want to bring up too many bad memories for Washington's fan base, but I sincerely hope Bobby Wagner is not a Washington free agent signing of a player that is washed and spends his last year there before officially hanging up the cleats. There's countless players you could mention throughout the years, but the future Hall of Famer played well for Seattle last year and was named an All-Pro for the 10th year in a row. I don't think the 2024 Commanders defense will be amongst the best in the league by any means, but I think it will be a noticeable improvement from 2023 to 2024, and that's huge considering this team allowed 27 or more points in the final 8 games they played last year. And to be completely honest, I think the Commanders' defense is serviceable entering the year, meaning I don't really look at any position and think, man, they are outright bad, the way I look at some other teams' position groups across the league. I know there is a genuine concern for the Commanders' edge group, and I get it, but with the combination of Payne and Allen from the interior, and Johnny Newton, Dorrance Armstrong, and Dante Fowler also contributing as pass rushers, I don't think it's going to be as bad as people make it out to be. And there's also the fact that Dan Quinn is a good defensive-minded coach. I know it's incredibly easy to look at the very last game Dan coached as the defensive coordinator of the Cowboys and look at how many points were given up and how many chunk plays the Packers had within that game, but the Cowboys under Dan Quinn finished 7th in points allowed per game in 2021 and 5th in points allowed per game in each of the last 2 years. Sure, there was better talent in Dallas, and there's not many teams that have a Micah Parsons, but Washington's defense is going to be better in 2024 for a few reasons. They're going to have a head coach that's a better fit for the team, and who genuinely wants to be there and to establish a winning culture. We discussed this a lot during the interview with Trevor Sika coming up, but the 2023 Commanders had a minus 14 turnover margin, and opposing quarterbacks had a touchdown to interception ratio of 39-8 against them in 2023. The reality is, if you have those 2 stats alone, you are not going to win many games, and not surprisingly, they didn't. But what will also help the Commanders in 2024 is Jayden Daniels. Defenses having to account for Jayden Daniels on every play is going to be, and brace yourself, is going to have close to a Lamar Jackson type impact with how much he runs, strictly from a running standpoint. I do not expect Jayden to be a 2-time MVP winner and to transcend the game the way Lamar has, but being able to run the football and to keep their own defense off the field will be incredibly rewarding down the stretch of the season. And being able to play complementary football, which is something the Commanders could not do in 2024, is going to be critical for their success this year. The Commanders' corners are going to get discussed a lot this year, and one in particular. And while they don't have a Sauce Gardner or Pat Surtain, I think their corners will be okay for 2024 specifically. A lot of corner play, though obviously not all to be clear, but a lot of corner play can be attributed to pass rush. And there's obviously going to be big plays given up by the 2024 Commanders defense, but They're not going to be 39-8 opposing TD to INT ratio bad. I refuse to believe they're going to be that bad 2 years in a row. I absolutely love the selection of nickel corner Mike Sainristil in the second round, and think he will be a good player for them for years to come. Now, I don't want to harp on the Emmanuel Forbes selection for too long, but I was never a fan of this pick specifically when Christian Gonzalez was on the board. I hope Forbes works out as a player, but he's already down on the depth chart entering his second season. But as long as the Commanders' corners can be okay, not even great, just okay, which should also improve with their pass rush getting better, this unit will improve by default. I like Benjamin St-Juste, and I think he is a good player to be molded by Dan Quinn. They finished dead last in several categories last year, and I think they will still be in the lower half of defensive rankings in 2024, but I think they'll be in the 22 to 25 range, which again is a 7 to 10 spot improvement from last year to this year. The big thing with the Washington Commanders defense this year is realistic expectations. Do not expect them to be the 85 Bears or 2000 Ravens, and obviously nobody is, but the bottom line is they will get better. Now, with the 2024 Commanders offense, I think there are a lot of opinions and a lot of loud opinions, and it kind of depends on the side of the fence you fall on. I think there's some people that legitimately think Jaden Daniels will elevate this offense into a top 12 or 13 unit, and that the Commanders are not necessarily going to be a playoff team, but they're going to be close, and they may get 8 or 9 wins in year one. And then I think there's other people that are definitely on the pessimistic side and saying, oh, we have RG4, he's going to be a bust, and in 3 years, we'll be in the top 2 or 3 again. And I think it's somewhere in between, and if I had to choose a side, I would definitely lean more on the optimistic side. Now, I do have a couple of concerns with the 2024 Commanders offense, and we'll get to that, but Jaden Daniels first. He is going to elevate this offense in a way that Sam Howell and really any quarterback in this offense, dating honestly all the way back to RG3, ironically enough, couldn't elevate this offense. Kirk obviously couldn't. Alex Smith, no offense, obviously couldn't. Dwayne Haskins, rest in peace, was not a scrambler, and you get the point. They haven't had a true, scrambling dual threat player since RG3 all the way back in 2012. So Jaden Daniels in that aspect will absolutely help the Commanders offense. Now, there is one big concern I have, and honestly, yes, I do have concerns with the receivers behind Terry McLaurin, but my biggest concern is starting Brandon Coleman at left tackle after being a third-round pick this spring. To me, that is potential for absolute disaster, and I really hope that this team runs a lot of 12 personnel where we can ship a tight end to help Brandon Coleman out, because he is going to need it. When you are in this division with pass rush on pass rush on pass rush, and when you are going to be playing, whether it's Bryce Huff, whether it's Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, of course Micah Parsons, any of those guys for 6 out of 17 games, and obviously the other 11 games aren't going to be against, a Division II or Division III college team where, Brandon Coleman can be fine for the other 11 games. I mean, he's going to be playing great pass rushers all year long. I really hope that Cliff Kingsbury sets his left tackle up for success as much as he tries to set his rookie quarterback up for success, because if he doesn't, then it could be a year very similar to what we saw last year when Sam Howell was, of course, the most sacked quarterback in the entire NFL. Now, running back Brian Robinson, to me, is a player who is better than what his numbers show through the first 2 years of his career. Now, I don't think Brian is going to be, a prime Adrian Peterson or a prime Marshawn Lynch, but for him to average just 3.9 yards per carry in a season, obviously that's, kind of indicative on the offensive line, but I think he's a lot better of a player than what the numbers show, or at least the raw numbers, and I think Jaden Daniels will also help with that. Having to constantly account for a quarterback in the ground game as well is never fun for a defense. Just ask opposing defenses how they've liked dealing with Lamar Jackson over the past couple of years, and even Justin Fields for that matter, from a rushing aspect, not from, taking 5 seconds to throw the ball and all that. No offense, Justin Fields fans, but little different in the ground game and passing game for the player Justin Fields is. But my point is Jaden Daniels should, in theory, help everybody out on the offense. He's going to make a lot of guys' jobs easier, and in some aspects, yes, whenever he is running behind the offensive line, there's going to be pressures given up that aren't the offensive lineman's fault that Jaden kind of walks into, and it's going to look bad for them on the stat sheet. But overall, I think this offense will finish right around 20th or 21st, maybe even the 22 area in terms of both points and yards. And I do think Terry McLaurin is in for a career year. Terry was drafted back in 2019 and has not had good quarterback play for really his entire career. And I think this is the year where I know there's passionate Terry McLaurin fans, and I know those fans really want to see Terry, go off and absolutely have the quarterback play, and he finally has it. And to be honest, I sit here and I do think that Terry will go for over 1,200 yards. I really do think that. And I think it's going to be obviously based a lot on volume because there's not a lot of other great options in this offense, but I do think Terry will go for over 1,200 yards, and I think he'll go for over 7 touchdowns as well. Now, one player I am really looking forward to seeing how they ease him into the offense, because the tight end position is incredibly difficult to transition to from college to the NFL because they have to be an NFL receiver and have NFL receiving traits while also having NFL offensive lineman traits. Because if you are a liability in the run game as a tight end, as a young tight end, you're not going to see the field as much as you probably are used to in college. And if other teams know you're a liability, then that's obviously only going to hurt the team more because, if you're on the field, then it would be pretty much known to everyone that it's a passing play. All of this to say, I can't wait to see how they use second-round tight end Ben Sinnott. I loved him coming out of Kansas State this past year, and I don't think he's going to be the most productive player per se, but I think he'll be right around, 35, 40 catches. And I'm also eager to see how many games the Commanders get in this year, like last year, where they were just down double digits. Because at the end of the day, the Commanders are obviously going to be a lot better of a team than what we saw last year, but they're also not going to be an 11 or 12 win team. At least I would be absolutely shocked if they did. My closing point for the Commanders offense is there's going to be a big difference between Sam Howell and Jaden Daniels, and I don't just mean in terms of play style. Sam Howell last year had 31 turnover-worthy plays, and this is per Pro Football Focus, and the second highest quarterback in turnover-worthy plays had 26. So those 5 turnover-worthy plays from Sam to the second player, which was Desmond Ridder of the Falcons, the difference between Desmond Ridder and the 10th quarterback in turnover-worthy plays was also 5. So Sam he put the ball in harm's way a lot. And Jaden Daniels, for reference, last year only had 4 turnover-worthy plays at LSU, and, a lot of his plays were, outside the numbers, and they weren't really a lot of over the field, and he didn't really put the ball in harm's way. So I am eager to see how that translates to the NFL and how defenses game plan around Jaden Daniels in that aspect. But overall, if I had to project Jaden Daniels in his rookie year, I think he'll be around 4,100 total yards, and I think it'll be around 24 or 25 total touchdowns, and the fumbles are definitely going to be something and the interceptions too, for that matter, because he only had 4 last year, but the turnovers are going to be definitely something I'm going to be paying attention to from the number 2 overall pick. So let's go ahead and dive into the interview with Pro Football Focus lead draft analyst Trevor Sikkema. All right, we now welcome on a very special guest to the channel. It is the lead draft analyst from Pro Football Focus, Trevor Sika. Trevor, how we doing?
Dude, I'm doing great. I appreciate you having me on the show. We're on the eve of football, NFL football getting kicked off. It's a wonderful time of year, my friend. I appreciate you having me.
Of course. So we have the Washington Commanders to preview. A little full transparency. If you are familiar with Trevor's work, he's obviously a big Bucs fan. So I reached out to Trevor for the Bucs episode a couple of months ago. No BS. The day after the Bucs preview was released, Trevor hit me back, and I asked if another team would be. I'm not calling you out. I mean, you made an appearance for another team, so which I appreciate. But it was just like the day after, like of all things. But
that's on me, honestly. That's on me. Sometimes I am terrible with checking like different. Like I'll be like, oh yeah, I checked my Twitter DMs today. Like I'm good. Nobody said. And then you would message me on Instagram DMs. I was like, oh no, I forgot to check that one. So I missed it. That's on me. But here we are. We're talking about the Commanders. It's going to be a good chat anyways. I promise I'm going to make it up to you.
Absolutely. So Jaden Daniels, number 2 overall pick, is there a player? I mean, I feel like Jaden is the obvious choice here. Is there a player you're looking forward to watching on this team outside of Jaden this year? Which player would that be?
Well, man, I feel like there's a lot of answers for that question because this Commanders roster is a lot of fun. Like, it's a lot of new faces, a lot of rookies that I like. It's a coaching staff that I like. I think I'll be a little bit stereotypical and say Terry McLaurin because for a while we have just been saying, like, we got to get this guy a quarterback, got to get this guy a quarterback. Jaden knows how to throw the ball deep. Like, Jaden knows how to emphasize a wide receiver one. We saw it with Malik Neighbors last year. We've seen it. We even saw it with Brian Thomas Jr. as well at LSU. And so we even saw that a little bit in the preseason, how Jaden's already pretty fearless with pushing the ball deep down the field. And for as much as Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, gets a little bit of flack for always like playing his players and it feels like the same positions, like everybody always like screenshotted like where Nuke Hopkins was when he was in Arizona, and it was just like the same exact spot and all of his routes come from the same spot. He does know how to emphasize the best receiver on the team. So I feel like that combination of Cliff recognizing the talent that McLaurin has, and now finally a quarterback who I think has the talent to really be able to get him the ball consistently and maximize what he is as a playmaker, we will see the best version of Terry McLaurin that we have seen yet. So honestly, that is my answer for what I'm looking forward to seeing to most when it comes to one player.
I couldn't agree more. And Terry's had not great quarterback play throughout his entire career. He's entering year 6 now. He was drafted all the way back in 2019. Now, this I feel like has to be brought up. Do you worry with the development and the progression of Jaden Daniels in his rookie year? And I'll be honest, I'll preface it with I wasn't the biggest Jahan Dotson fan. I was kind of soured on the whole, like, let's trade out of Chris Olave to trade back only 5 spots to draft Jahan. How do you think that? I mean, are you worried about the Commanders' offense without him this year, and that it's basically Terry and everybody else?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit worrisome because you just look at the rest of the wide receiver room and it's not a lot of like bona fide stars, right? I think that there's a really good opportunity for a guy like Luke McCaffrey, who you drafted a little bit later, who I think could stand out, who is an interesting, like, taller but slot receiver. I think he's an interesting player to be able to get in that spot. Diami Brown, I liked as a deep threat when I was watching him at North Carolina. And so I think you're going to unlock a little bit more of him, but there's no doubt about it that this team is still a work in progress, right? We knew that it was going to be coming off of the Ron Rivera era, and it just felt like Jahan Dotson was sort of one of those later casualties of, hey, you were for the old regime, you're not for this current regime. And so I was a little bit shocked that he got moved. I really was, but it's sort of all part of the plan, if you will. It was always going to be a multi-year rebuild here for the Commanders. So in terms of them competing this year, yes, it's obviously something that you have to think about because they don't have a lot of stud passing weapons to go to other than McLaurin. But, long-term, I think they'll be okay. Long-term, I think they'll be fine. They'll be able to get a receiver sometime next offseason. So
going off of that with Jaden Daniels, and because this is going to be the big thing, I mean, it's going to be brought up especially if he takes a sack. I mean, not like the 9 sack games like Sam Howell had last year and all of that and the 60+ sacks, but anytime he takes, a 2 or 3 sack game, how worried are you about the offensive line really outside of Sam Cosmi entering 2024?
Yeah, that's the big question mark, right? I think that if there's something that's really going to hold back this team from being much better than what we've seen in the past, and when I say much better, I don't know if that's going to exactly mean that they're going to get a bunch more wins this year specifically, but I think just the health of the team and who they're able to beat and the sort of the ceiling of this team will be on the rise. The offensive line does play a big role into that, though, including Jaden's development. You don't want to get him too rattled. You don't want to get him hurt, right? I think that was a big issue that people talked about with Jaden Daniels coming into this season, or coming into the draft season, I should say, is this guy going to be durable enough in the NFL? And Washington's got some question marks along the offensive line. I mean, Brandon Coleman is a guy who I really liked at TCU. I feel like he's got starting caliber potential, but if you've got to get something from him this year as a starting offensive lineman in the NFL, that is going to be a tall task for him. So getting the offensive line cohesive together and playing their best ball is going to be paramount for this team, realizing what their 2024 potential is going to be. And of course, that goes for Jaden Daniels as well.
So outside of Jaden, obviously, I mean, when you are a top 2 pick, it's going to be naturally discussed. which rookie are you looking forward to most watching from this class? Now, they had 3 second-round picks. They had, of course, Johnny Newton from Illinois, Mike Sanderstill from Michigan, and then even a tight end to help Jaden out and Ben Sinnott. Personally, I am looking forward to Sanderstill. I really, really loved him as a prospect coming out of Michigan this past year, and I really can't wait to see how Dan Quinn utilizes him in the defense in year one of the Dan Quinn era.
I am not only fascinated to see how he uses Mike Sanderstill, but also just the safeties in general. Because when you look at this depth chart, it's Sanderstill, it's Quan Martin, who's also played in the slot and also as a safety hybrid. Jeremy Chin's kind of the same way. You drafted a player in Tyler Owens, who's got crazy athleticism, who sort of is of that mold as well. So to me, that was a fascinating part of the Commanders' offseason is they stockpiled these very versatile slot type of defenders. And your draft Sanderstill, who was also one of my favorite players in the entire draft. I mean, how could you not love his game? It's just so fiery every time you turn on the tape. He's just oozing with competitiveness, and that's a player that you would want on your football team. I believe in Dan Quinn to get the most out of a player like that, because Sanderstill, he's not the fastest guy in the world. Obviously, he's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's such a damn good football player. And I think when you put those guys in the right positions, they can still succeed at the NFL level, despite, being a little bit smaller on the measurable side and having things to overcome when it comes to some athletic limitations. Dan Quinn's the type of coach who I think could get the most out of him there. So just like Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter did while he was at Michigan, I'm really excited to see Mike Sanderstill. There's no doubt about it. I think he's obviously a big shout out. Johnny Newton's a huge shout out as well that I would love to make. I'm really looking forward to seeing how he plays in that defensive line with guys like John Allen and Deron Payne, two mainstay veteran defensive linemen. How much is Newton going to get into that rotation? Is it truly going to be a three-headed monster there on the interior? Because I felt like Johnny Newton was one of the best defensive players in college football over the last 2 years. And a lot of people talked about Byron Murphy II from Texas as the best interior defensive lineman in last year's class. And don't get me wrong, Byron Murphy's awesome. I thought they were very close on my big board where I had those guys, but I gave Johnny Newton the edge just because of how much I love his game and how he plays. And again, this is somebody who I'm excited to see in the Dan Quinn defense. So really excited to see Sanderstill as well. But my rookie that I would shout out would be Johnny Newton.
So off of that, and you mentioned not just the rookies, but you mentioned almost the whole defense. This defense finished 32nd in both points against and yards allowed last year, and generally that's going to happen whenever you trade not one but two good edge rushers prior to the deadline, and then you're just kind of saying good luck guys out there. How much if there was like a ranking from dead last, because it quite literally cannot get worse, and I really liked what this team did this offseason, because I thought they acknowledged effectively how poor the roster was and just said, like, we just want to raise the base of where we are. So if you had to project from, again, dead last, where would the range be for where they finished in defensive rankings this year, just in terms of simply just yards and points allowed? Because it can't get worse.
No, I think that we're going to be somewhere between, and obviously like each statistic is going to be a little bit defense, scoring defense, PFF grade, how often you're getting after the passer, all that kinds of stuff. But I would say generally this will be a ranked 15th through 20th. Ranked defense. So not quite top half of the league, but I think that they're going to get very close to that number. I think they'll be top 20 in a lot of respects. And again, it's just because I feel like Dan Quinn's a fantastic defensive mind, and he's going to make the most out of a lot of the new changes that he brought in. So, it's not just some of those guys that I listed at safety, but guys at the linebacker level as well. Frankie Louvu, I thought was a great addition for them. Bobby Wagner obviously is a big time veteran addition that they had. Edge rusher, somebody's got to get after the passer, right? I mean, I think that's just, there's a lot of opportunity there for guys like Dorrance Armstrong, guys like Cleveland Farrell. Dante Fowler is there as well, which is funny because Dante Fowler is kind of a holdover from when Dan Quinn was at the University of Florida back on Muschamp's staff, I believe in 2012, I think is when that was. So it's funny that those two are kind of reuniting here at the NFL level, but I would say that for most statistics, I would expect Washington to land somewhere between 15th and 20th ranked in the NFL when it comes to defense.
I mean, even off of last year, that would be an insane jump just because of, I mean, this team allowed 30 points in, I want to say 10 games last year. And
Yeah, it was not good. Yeah.
I mean, they got in a track meet with Miami. They said there was one play in particular where they had a cover one, no safety help against Tyreek Hill. And that one is about as you would expect. And that kind of summarized the 2023 Washington Commanders. So my next question is, Dan Quinn is not, the Ben Johnson, the kind of like the offensive, the innovative offensive minds, like the Kevin O'Connells, any of them, especially the Sean McVay tree. Do you worry at all? And I know they're completely different coaches, but do you worry at all with the fact that Dan Quinn is, retread's not the word that I want to use, but just an older coach and a guy that, I mean, the Super Bowl and then everything that declined from his previous tenure in Atlanta. Do you worry about kind of like painting lipstick on a pig, but different colors from Rivera to Dan Quinn?
So I really don't. And I would say that in most cases, I would be worried about that. Because I do think that the NFL can be a little bit of a boys club. They just rehire the same coaches when it feels like these guys really are, they're not for the young game. The game's kind of passing them. They're not able to evolve. This game is evolving. And so there are a lot of times, I would say the majority of the time, I do feel that way of the way that you're asking this question. I don't feel that way about Dan Quinn, because when I watch Dan Quinn, let's all be honest here. They should have won that Super Bowl. Right. I mean, like it was basically everything that could have gone wrong went wrong for that to be one of the biggest disasters in Super Bowl history. All things considered, they were up in that Super Bowl. They were dominating that Super Bowl. They had an unbelievable year. I look at that thinking they could have and should have probably won a Super Bowl that year. They make it to the playoffs the next year. They win double-digit games. But then those last 2 years of Dan Quinn when he was in Atlanta, they finished 7-9 both of those years. And the reason why I wanted Dan Quinn to get another head coaching job is actually because of that last year that they had when they went 7-9. They started the year, and I've got the win-loss record in front of me here. They started that season 1-7. 1-7, and they ended up finishing that year 7-9. This was for a coach that the entire locker room knew was cooked. They were firing this guy after the season. They were moving on in Atlanta. The Super Bowl had been 3 years ago at that point. They went 7-9 the year before in a disappointing season. And then they just started the year 1-7. And yet, because of who Dan Quinn is and the culture that they had in that locker room, they still wanted to play for Dan Quinn, so much so that they turned that season around and go 7-9. They did not give up, basically in a situation where they probably could have. Me as a player, I'd be tempted to do that. That to me speaks volumes about the type of coach that Dan Quinn is and why I always felt like he deserved another shot as a head coach somewhere, because I think he is a true player's coach. I think you saw that in Dallas. He got the most out of his players while he was the defensive coordinator there, and I think he's going to be able to do the same in Washington.
I really like everything that you said, in terms of buying in, because that's, I feel like with the Commanders, like half the battle. I've lived in Maryland my whole life, and that's, the Dan Snyder era was just a disaster for the whole entire thing. So, there was always like, our players going to buy in with that. And then the Ron Rivera he was hired to kind of like right the ship from that standpoint. Like, let's just, kind of get past those days. And then I like everything that you said about Dan Quinn. Now, my question off of that would be, do you worry at all? And I would imagine no, but do you worry at all just the final game in Dallas and Green Bay? And because that obviously wasn't on Dak, do you worry at all about, just one bad game, flush it down the toilet, throw the tape away, bury the tape? Do you worry about that all lingering over? Do you think that's fresh start, out of mind, will be good from here?
I think it has to be, right? Because everything went wrong in that game. Everything. Dak was a problem in that game. The defense was a problem in that game. The coaching decisions were a problem in that game. It was just, the Cowboys just got punched in the mouth. They were not ready for that game in Green Bay. I don't know if they just thought, hey, we're making the playoffs. It's a really good team. Dak had an MVP level season last year. If Lamar didn't have the season that he did, I was making the case later in the year, not for Dak to win it over Lamar, but for Dak to at least get the recognition that if Lamar wasn't having the caliber season that he was, Dak Prescott probably should have won MVP of the other players that were around the league. He had such a great year. And I wonder if it was just the Cowboys thinking, we got this. We got a good defense. We got basically an MVP caliber quarterback. Offense is humming. The offensive line's great. We're good to go. And Green Bay just came in and punched him straight in the mouth. And I think that was a total organizational failure. Dan Quinn isn't blameless in that, but it's one of those games that I think you just got to chalk up and be like, this was bad. Let's, like you said, burn the tape, move on, never do it again.
Yeah, it was, I mean, there's a couple of things that I look at from that game, whether there was one play, I don't know if you remember off like the top of your head, but there was one play, it was like third and 6 on the 36, and Dak he took one of the most unnecessary sacks I've ever seen within that game, and it put him out of field goal range, and it would have made a 3-score game a 2-score game. But going off of that, I do want to ask a couple of rapid fire questions for the 2024 Commanders. You ready?
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
All right. Over under Jaden Daniels 25.5 total touchdowns.
Ooh, that's a good number. I think I'm going to say under, like just slightly under, somewhere in the 20s, but I'll say slightly under.
Okay, so we discussed Terry McLaurin in the receiving corps. So Terry's one-man guy, over under 1,100 and a half or 1,099 and a half receiving yards.
Yeah, they're going to need it from him. So I'll say over. I'll say over with McLaurin there.
I honestly don't think 1250s out of the equation for Terry this year. So next one, over under Commanders wins 6.5.
I'm going to say over. I predicted them to go 7-10 this year. I honestly think that they could give the Cowboys a run for their money as the second best team in this division. I don't know exactly what the number is going to be. Like, I think the Cowboys are going to finish a little bit lower than what they were last year. I think they could even be a single-digit win team this year, but I think the Commanders are going to be annoying to them, if you will, in the division standing. So I'm going to go with over 6.5 wins.
Okay. Over under another 6.5 sacks for big Jonathan Allen. That's a tricky one.
I was going to say, I don't, man, if he's got to get home. Do you have his stats up? What was,
it's like he's been close each year. Last year I kind of throw out just because of how like everything was, kind of working against him. He had 9 back in 21, 7.5 in 22, and 5.5 last year.
Yeah, I think he gets over. I think he's back. I think he's back, rejuvenated again, playing for Quinn in that defense. I think he's going to rejuvenate him. He's getting over.
Okay, last question. This is not an over-under. This is just one that I'm actually very curious about. Okay. People tweet at you all the time. You're known as the barbecue guy on Twitter. 3 sides minimum. Yes. So what are your 3 sides? Or you might be a 4-side guy. What are the sides?
So I think the whole point of the 3 sides minimum movement is to sort of have your 2 sides that you normally go to, right? Because when you go to a barbecue place, normally you'll see on the menu, it'll be like, oh, you get a plate, and then it'll come with 1 meat and then 2 sides. So everybody's got their 2 sides. Like somebody like people will be like, oh, I love mac and cheese. I love baked beans. I'm always going to get mac and cheese and baked beans. But the 3 sides minimum says, hey, add an extra side in there. And if you see one that looks really good, empower yourself to go get it and try it. So normally the 3rd side, I kind of rotate a little bit, but I would say the sides that I get the most of a trio would be mac and cheese, barbecue baked beans, and then collard greens / coleslaw, depending on which one looks better at the place that I'm at. So those are my 3/4 that I typically go for.
So in the barbecue baked beans, do they have to have bacon in them? Because I think that's I love that. Whenever I was going to say they don't have to, but if they do, it's an added bonus. All right. I'm also like I don't know if this is weird or sicko behavior, but I put a little barbecue sauce in the baked beans as well. That might be sicko behavior. People might have turned off the podcast for that. I'm sorry in advance for maybe your dip in views. You can check the analytics later, but sometimes like a little barbecue sauce. Honestly, I don't dislike barbecue and mac and cheese as well. You get a little smoky flavor within the mac. So I don't dislike that either. But Trevor, I do appreciate your time, and let the people know about the podcast. Anything else you're working on?
Sure. Yeah. Podcast, NFL Stock Exchange. Myself and Connor Rogers are covering the NFL Draft 365. So at any point in time, if you're listening to this and you want to dip into draft season a little bit, we got you with the rankings, the mock drafts, the big boards. We're going to go through team needs throughout the season as they evolve, all that great stuff. And then, everything else over at pff.com.
All right. Well, thank you again, Trevor.
Appreciate it, man. Anytime.
All right, guys, that is going to wrap up the 2024 team preview series. I hope you guys enjoyed. It started all the way back in June, and we've came a long way over the past few months. There's been a lot that's transpired in the past few months. I really hope you guys enjoyed, and we had a lot of great guests. We had, there was every video, there's several people that comment, their thoughts, how much they appreciate the videos, how much they enjoy. They let me know what they agree on, disagree on. I cannot thank you guys enough for the support, truly. And I know I say that a lot at the end of every video, but it really could not be possible without you guys. So I never want to not hammer home just how thankful I am for your guys' continued support. And there's a lot of great content coming out soon. I really try not to get too giddy excited on the channel, but guys, football is back, and it's, for me personally, it's the best time of the year. From now until the end of week 18, we will have every single Sunday. We will have a weekly recap. I know a lot of people like the weekly recaps. And then we have Tuesday videos on Tuesday and Thursday at noon, and then Saturday at 10 a.m. These are all Eastern Standard Times, by the way. We will not have a video on Thanksgiving, but I hope you guys enjoy the content. And I know it makes my day every time I read, hey, great video, man. Really appreciate everything. And guys, it couldn't be possible without you. So if you're not already subscribed, if you enjoyed this, please subscribe. It's going to be a great football season ahead. And there's going to be one video out before the weekly recap. It's going to be bold takes for the 2024 season. But guys, I can't thank you enough for the support. So until next time, as always, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.